Hi, welcome to another episode of Own It for Good. And today I am going to talk to you a little bit about the work of Byron Katie, or known affectionately as Katie. And she was probably the first real mentor that I had, and my sort of gateway person into this whole world of coaching and self-development and spirituality and questioning my thoughts. She just changed my life. And I think if you haven't heard of her, she could do the same for you. But before I get too much further in, I want to welcome anybody who's joining me for the first time. My name is Felicia Holmes. I have a coaching program and this podcast and YouTube video series called Own It for Good. And you can find out specifically what that stands for, because it's a lot in my previous episodes. But in a nutshell, it is about taking personal responsibility for our lives and really owning it. And it's an acronym as well, and it's a part of my system. The O stands for outcome. The W stands for why. The N stands for, okay, now what am I willing to do about it? I, doing it from a place of integrity, and T, taking action. So, and all of that is for not only our good, but for the good of the world. All right, so that's a little summary and a refresher. Anyway, I just so appreciate you tuning in today and joining me while I share some of my learnings from Miss Byron Katie. And she is the author of several books. Probably her most well-known is Loving What Is. So a little bit of a backstory and what was going on in my life when I found Byron Katie, or she found me, or God helped me find her. Like it was all very serendipitous, and I wish I could remember exactly how I came across her and how this book came into my life. But I wasn't so good at journaling and record keeping back then. So I just know that she did come into my life when I needed her. And the work changed my life. And then looking back now, I can see it set me on this path of becoming a coach. Although I didn't really understand fully that at the time, or maybe even fear kept me from believing that that was my path or that was something that I could do. Okay, so before I go too far into what she is doing, I'm going to just set the stage. And in my life, about 11 years ago, my father passed away at Bishop, and he had a long battle with mental health and alcohol misuse, overuse, and just sort of in battle with depression. And we think maybe he was bipolar, although there's no official diagnosis, but definitely, especially towards the end of his life, demonstrated some mania as well as depression. And he was a brilliant man and a theologian. I miss him terribly, but it was a complicated relationship, as you can imagine, with that type of, those issues that he had and brought to the table. And my parents got divorced when I was about 16, and it was a pretty traumatic childhood up until then anyway. No physical abuse or even mental or emotional abuse. Both of my parents are amazing people who did the best they could. They got married young, and they just were probably not two people that should have gotten married, but they did. And well, actually, I shouldn't say that, and that'll make sense in a minute when I start talking about the work from Byron Katie. They did get married and they had 3 wonderful kids. I am the oldest, and we moved a lot. So there was a lot of, I went to as many schools as there are years of school to go to. It seemed like every year I was at a new school, new town, often a new state, so that's where the trauma kind of came in. The just chaos, just where are we going to go, never having sort of a grounded place. And then my parents, argued quite a bit. There was a lot of tension. They were both young, just a chaotic environment to grow up in, and never having the security and stability that, a consistent home provides. So a lot of moving pieces within the relationship and the family. So anyway, long story short, let's fast forward. And my father was also a minister. He was a believer in Jesus. He was an ordained minister. He did that a lot of my childhood growing up, while also pursuing his PhD in theology. So a very heady household too on all of this. So a really interesting childhood that I had that created a lot of adversity for me. That was a great teacher that taught resilience and adaptability and resourcefulness. So there were a lot of good, there's always silver linings, and I was always very good at seeing the silver linings. Anyway, he ultimately had a manic break when my grandfather, his father, was dealing with terminal kidney cancer. And so the last few years of his life were very chaotic, to say the least, and which spilled over into our lives, and trying to not take care of him, because he was still at that point very capable, but he soon kind of spiraled out of control and moved from our home state, or where we had kind of grown up partially. Anyway, like I said, I moved around a lot. But the last place that I lived and graduated from high school from in California, and where my grandparents made their long-term home. So he moved from California to where I live now in the state of Kentucky. And we helped him the best that we could. I had young children at the time. My sister had also moved here, and she had young children at the time. And we did the best we could to provide with him. And if anybody knows anything about addiction and a lot of what comes with families that deal with addiction, and now looking back, of course, I can see a lot of the unhealthy dynamics that we had developed and learned, and that was even causing trouble in my life as an adult. The codependency, the enabling. So how to be responsible to somebody without being responsible for somebody. And that was a really hard line to walk, and a lot of feelings of, why is he this way? Why should he be that? He shouldn't be this way. I shouldn't have to deal with this. A lot of these thoughts in my head of anger, disappointment, maybe his choice to drink alcohol and get to this point of dependence, that it interfered with his life and then interfered with our lives, and thinking thoughts that weren't very helpful to me, but were very natural and understandable. as people. We all have people in our lives that make choices, and then we can take that personally. Very normal, very human thing to do. And he passed away suddenly after a binge drinking episode, not from the drinking itself, I surprisingly enough, but actually from it was still a side problem that developed, which was a pulmonary embolism. But he had signed a DNR and on file with the hospital, and so they were unable to save him. So anyway, that's just a nutshell of just a lot of chaos that happened, and he passed away. It'll be almost 11 years this October. This October will be 11 years. And as of the time of this recording, it is September of 2021. So he passed away in October of 2010. And again, it was a few years of just chaos that was closer to home, literally, and where my grandparents, because of my grandfather's illness, had sort of said, "Good luck, Ed. We have this cancer to deal with. We can't fix you anymore or give you money or support, we can't do this anymore." And that was a cycle that had happened in our family, with financially kind of taking care of him when he would have these periods of his life where he needed support and was unable to support himself due to his addiction or whatever it was. And I don't want to cast aspersions on him. He was a really kind, smart person who had addiction to an addictive substance. So let's not forget about. So he was not broken, and a lot of science around addiction has come out since his passing, and a lot of new programs and approaches that I think he would have benefited from, versus AA being kind of the only option or the only acceptable option when he was living, and which he did participate in and have some success with, but although temporary. So what does all that have to do with what I'm about to share with you from my mentor, Byron Katie? And when I say describe her as a mentor, I mean, I don't know her personally. I feel like I do. I think I do, actually, through her work and what she is gifted with the world. But she does not know me. So hence is the nature of a lot of these relationships with mentors and authors and coaches and I'm sure at some point somebody will refer to me that way as well. So the work is basically a method of inquiry, and it's a way to put some separation or some thoughts between you and your thoughts. And many people, it all happens so quickly, and we can get very identified with our thoughts, and then we can cause ourselves suffering. And was the point of my story in sharing. I was very much caught in a lot of feelings of anger, abandonment. I had a lot of thoughts around my childhood, and basically, I had this idealized version, and Facebook didn't even exist then, of what a life should look like. You grow up with a nice stable family, and sort of a beaver cleaver idea in my head, and with a loving family, growing up with friends all through grade school and high school, and I didn't get that. And so I had a lot of feelings of sort of being robbed of this experience of life that I felt like I should have had. And if my parents, and my father in particular, had had his act together a little bit better, that I would have had. I felt like he was making and actually literally choosing alcohol over me, and that meant that he didn't love me enough. I had a lot of these thoughts that were really causing a lot of suffering and pain in my life. And then that even spilled over into relationships with my sisters, because, when your sisters and all of this family drama, and I'm just talking a little bit about the drama around my dad. Well, my dad came from a family where there was a lot of drama, and I'm not going to get into all of that, but this was learned behavior. And then in this type of environment, a lot of times people will take sides, and we are all shooting all over each other. You should do this. If you were a better daughter, or better sister, or better blah, 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 you would do this or that. So I had a lot of, I was basically kind of a victim of my own thoughts. Well, but I didn't know it. And that's where Katie comes in. The wonderful Byron Katie, and Loving What Is. And she basically lays out the premise, and she herself suffered in a way like this, to the point that she ended up in a halfway house. And one day, she kind of describes that the lights literally just came on, and she realized, she was like, oh, I'm having all these thoughts, and they're painful, but the problem is I'm choosing to believe them. What? Right? And that is where a lot of us are. We don't realize that we have a choice, and that we have some inner wisdom. And and she has 4 questions that she's broken it down into, that I'll go into, and then something called a turnaround. So this whole methodology of questioning thoughts is called the work, or it's a method of inquiry, is how she describes it. And at the core of it, and the title of her book, Loving What Is, states her overall philosophy. Whatever is, like reality, whatever is happening is supposed to be happening. And how do we know that? Because it is. And then it's our thoughts in response to reality that then create our quality of life and our experience of it, how we move through the world, our interpersonal relationships, is how we not only understand reality, but how we choose to think about it and respond to it. And a lot of people are like me, thinking it shouldn't be happening. He should be different. She shouldn't do that. He should know better. Well, and we're in each other's business. So she describes that there's 3 types of business. There's my business, there's your business, and there's God's business. And a lot of us are over here in other people's business and in God's business, and then nobody's over here minding our own business. And we create a lot of drama by getting in other people's business and thinking they should know what they should be doing, when we can't even figure out what we should be doing. And if you're living your life, and if you're living your life and I'm living your life, then who's over there living my life, right? So I was so busy living my father's life, and maybe even my grandfather's life and my sister's life, and I wasn't doing a very good job of living my own life, because I was so busy over here being distracted that I was not, taking care of my own business. Or I would even get upset with my husband. Of course, then I had young kids, and there's a lot of other people's business to be in. And it's very tempting. It even is a form of its own addiction. And now that I've done a lot of work on addiction and understanding the science of it and brain science, this type of drama can be very addictive, and being involved in other people's business and even in God's business. And boy, if you're during the world that we're living in right now of 2020 and 2021 and COVID and all of the unrest, the whole world is collectively sort of experiencing this right now. A lot of shooting all over each other, to the point that we are being physically separated from each other for medical reasons. But even beyond that, even there are people that are making whether or not somebody is wearing a mask or choosing to get a vaccine or not as reasons to be separate from each other, even within families. I hear it all the time. And I think the world could use Byron Katie's wisdom right now. And so when we are mentally in other people's business and we're not minding our own business, then we're over there wondering why our life isn't working. So this just literally blew my mind when I found the work. And it was right after my dad passed. And I also then had to make another move as an adult. And my grandfather died, and my stepfather was life threw a lot of experiences at me, or reality was throwing a lot of experiences at me that gave me a lot of opportunities to practice the work. Now, it's not a miracle. Well, it can be, I think, but this is not. I don't want to mislead anybody by saying, "Oh, I did this work and now I'm like peace and bliss and all of that." No, this is something that has to be revisited often. And there's a process to the letting go. And sometimes it takes many, many sessions of doing the work to really let your inner wisdom. So it's a way of tapping into your inner wisdom. And it's really a series of questions, and that you can work through with somebody else. There, if you go to thework.com, and I'll put the link in the show or in the comments below. But if you go to thework.com, you can find some downloads of some worksheets to do this with. And so anyway, I'm going to go right to the 4 questions now and just describe them, and then we'll talk a little bit more about them. So 4 questions you can ask yourself when you're thinking a thought that is causing you distress. And that is, number 1, is it true? Just sit with that. Is it true? And you may say yes or no. And it's really important to do this work on paper, because when we're in our minds, humans have an uncanny ability to be self-deluding. And we can, easily kind of explain and justify and twist when it's in our head. And there's something about, putting pen to paper and really doing this work, and maybe even doing it with somebody else if it's an issue that you're comfortable enough with doing that with somebody. And she has a lot of resources online and podcasts and all kinds of places where you can watch her do this with other people as well, to give you an idea of it. But anyway, question number 2. So you've said yes or no to the question, is it true? And then you ask yourself, can you absolutely know that it's true? So if we even go to my example, and I believed that my father didn't love me, or that he loved alcohol, or he didn't love me enough, Otherwise, he wouldn't have drank and made himself so sick that he, left this earth at age 50. I think he was 56 when he died, very young. And so I could sit with that thought. Is it true that he doesn't love you? I could say, yeah. People that love other people don't do things that harm themselves or take themselves away from people. Even while they're alive, I could point to that. I could justify why I thought that was true, because he was inebriated or recovering from being inebriated or wanting to isolate because he wanted to be inebriated, which meant that he was not with other people, or anyway, so I would have said maybe yes to that first question. And then I could ask myself, can I absolutely know that this is true? Then that gets a little trickier. Well, and especially now as an adult woman who also found myself indulging in a few too many glasses of Chardonnay, I know that I love my children. I absolutely, I cannot know that that's absolutely true. So then I've said no. So already I'm starting to feel a little bit of maybe peace there, a little bit. So she takes us to question number 3. How do you react, and what happens when you believe that thought? So when I'm believing the thought that my father doesn't love me, that hurts. I'm almost brought to tears now, even thinking about it, even though I've done the work. Like, I can remember what that felt like. That hurt, to believe that my father didn't love me. And I even feel bad now. I feel hurt that I felt hurt then, that I even maybe wasted some time feeling this pain and hurt. So maybe I even can do work on my thoughts now about thinking that I shouldn't have thought that then. You can see how the work can be helpful in any situation, anytime. Who would you be without that thought? Gosh, if I didn't have the thought that my father didn't love me, gosh, I would probably feel like he did love me. I would feel love. I would feel loved, and I would feel love. I would feel maybe even joy. So you can see how powerful this is, and where it also starts to demonstrate that we really do have choice. And the reality is that he was an overdrinker, and me trying to sugarcoat it or pretend that he wasn't, which that's another tactic that a lot of families do when they have addiction in the family. Then there's a series of what she calls to do these turnarounds. And the turnarounds are taking your initial statement. So when you're doing the work, you can write down a bunch of thoughts, but you only do the work on one thought at a time. So if we go back to my example about my father doesn't love me, and I tried to turn that around, and then that's basically saying the opposite, then I could say, for example, that I don't love my dad. And then you kind of sit with each turnaround thought and see and feel whether or not that feels true or not. That's sort of tapping into your own inner wisdom. And that feels a little bit true for me. I was angry at him, so maybe it was easier for me to not love him as a defense mechanism, and feeling justified even in that. Well, if he doesn't love me, I'm not going to love him. I was thinking very angry thoughts about him, so I was not being very loving. He what is another one way I could turn that around? I don't love me. That would be another one. Yeah, if I was trying to imagine ways that he didn't love me, that means that I would have to think that there's something about me that's unlovable. He doesn't love himself. Well, that was probably very true as well. So there's a lot of other ways to turn around these thoughts that could be just as true or truer. And then you can start to see how you can start to free yourself of these. And she says to let yourself fully experience these turnarounds. So really putting yourself in that situation so that you can, that's where you're kind of tapping into your own inner wisdom. And that is at the heart of the work, is a way to undo some of your thinking and see how we are all sort of storytellers and creators of our own reality. And even when we try to argue with reality, which that is what causes us suffering. And when we can accept reality through the work and through inquiry and become at peace with it and make friends with it and then get back in our own business, then we can actually see that everybody is doing the best they can. Nobody is intentionally hurting another person, and people that do that are confused. They don't know any better. They don't have the work. And so this gives us sort of some clarity on within ourselves, but also to notice that everything is a reflection of your own inner thoughts and your thinking. And you can start to free yourself from these thoughts. Now, it's not called the work for nothing. This is some work. And especially when you get to these turnarounds, it can sometimes feel tricky. So I do invite you to go and visit thework.com and really dive into it for yourself. Explore her book. She has really, the work has changed my life, and a lot of people out there use it, and even really famous neuroscientists like Dr. Daniel Amen, so many celebrities. You can attend her workshops and even get CE credit, psychologists and coaches. Like, this is legitimate stuff that has been tested and tried and taught. And she really was able to tap into something by loving what is. And she is not a Judeo-Christian in the sense that I am and believes in Jesus, but I believe that she understands God much more profoundly than many Christians that I know. God is, and she even says, reality is God, because reality rules. Think about that. And yet we try, in our egos, try to be little g gods and argue with reality and think that we should know better than God. And he's the ultimate author and storyteller of all of it. And we're just a blip on a page. We're a letter in a million-page book. And then yet we think that we know better and the way it should be and what other people should be doing. anyway, you can see how this goes. Hopefully, I have done Miss Katie's work some justice in describing it, and I hope I've encouraged you to maybe dive into some of the work for yourself. I also use it in my coaching practice. Like, I can't think of a better tool to, along with the Enneagram and the gospel. There are different thought questioning methods, and this is one that I will introduce you to. But this is where we can really get ourselves out of a lot of suffering, is by learning how to question our thoughts. And our brain works so fastly and furiously, and its job is to think thoughts. But you are not your brain or that, mechanism in there. You are the watcher. You have awareness outside of that. And that is where our true selves are, and our wisdom. And these 4 questions and the turnaround help us tap into that. All right, my friends, have a fabulous day, and I look forward to chatting with you again. And thanks for joining me.